So, Q-Force finally came out, after receiving so much hate and controversy from the LGBT community that was honestly kind of justified, since the two trailers relied on a lot of stereotypes that, for many, was tired and outdated. Now, I'm not saying you can't make a show for the LGBT community. Quite the opposite, in fact. But this show feels like someone making a show for feminists, but its main character is a stay-at-home housewife in the kitchen making food for her husband who goes out and provides for the family. Yeah, kind of a muddied message there, ain't it? And I'm not even saying that based on only the trailers, but the show itself, because I've seen the series to completion, and it is a massive letdown that relies too much on dated and tiresome stereotypes for the sake of humor in a genre that is incredibly oversaturated, even in 2031. Actually, before getting into the story, why don't I start with the comedy, since that is touted as one of the main genres of the show. So, like I said earlier, this show relies on a bunch of dated stereotypes about the LGBT community. That's not all it has in terms of humor. It also has gay jokes and references. There's jokes. And when they don't make me cringe, they just exist to basically say, "Hey, here's a reference to a thing! Laugh!"
I built a search algorithm more powerful than Google and only slightly less evil.
Base department?
Oh, and they also try to copy Family Guy's cutaway gag in one of the final fucking episodes of the season, and it is so cringeworthy. And considering this is coming from the count of cringe comedy, that should tell you how much I hated it in this show. But obviously, humor is subjective. That's why shows like the aforementioned Family Guy are still existing on TV nowadays, despite all these goddamn years. But one's perspective on the show's comedy is gonna vary from person to person. But to me, this shit was cringeworthy and made me take multiple breaks just to detox from the cancer that is this show's comedic calligraphy. Alright, enough of being the joke police. Let's get to the story. Basically, it's about a squad of LGBT secret agents trying to save the world and get approval from their agency, who's hiding a nasty secret from them and their fellow LGBT associates, that ultimately gets exposed near the end, and then they save the world. So, what's the problem with the story? Well, nothing actually. The story was actually interesting, compelling, and the twist genuinely threw me for a loop. If anything, the best part of the show was when the series decided to focus on the story. However, that also leads to a pacing issue, because this show focuses too much on the comedy, which, like I said, I hate it. The bits where there is genuine story or continuation to the plot feels like it kind of came out of left field, honestly, because the show is so focused on comedy. Yeah, it's just kind of weird when they actually get into a serious story, especially with episode 4. So it's like you get a sprinkle of interesting story developments before getting back to the mundane comedic shit, and that's not fun. If anything, it just feels like a fucking whiplash. I'm not even asking for either extreme. If you have to make a serious, but also comedic spy show, I'm just asking for a decent balance of comedy and seriousness, and I don't feel like this show has that. At all. Hell, even my favorite episode, which was episode 4, suffers from the two extremes issue, because it's mostly serious with not much humor to it, and while the serious story was executed well and the characters were likable in that episode, and also made sense to have that tone for the episode, like I said, it feels fucking jarring when compared to the previous episode's tone and emphasis on comedy more than serious shit. Hell, even when one of the main characters' love interests sacrifices themselves, it feels like whiplash to me because of the aforementioned tonal confusion this show has. Which fucking sucks, because that character did have some layers to them, as well as decent chemistry with their love interest. If anything, it honestly just feels like two camps were constantly at ends, trying to decide what the show was going to be, whether it be a comedy starring the LGBT community, or a spy show with the LGBT community as the main group, going at it, and in the end, it became a situation where I feel they tried to appeal to both sides, and ultimately pleased neither. But I digress. Let's get into the characters, which is a massive disappointment. A lot of the main cast has sprinkles of intrigue as characters, but they are weighed down by a lot of the comedy to the point where it hurts them as characters and makes them either unlikable, disappointing, or forgettable. Twink has a sympathetic backstory and decent chemistry with Stat and Steve, but his comedy extremely weighs him down. The flamboyant stereotype he's shoved into gets super tiring and repetitive, which, may I remind you, that stereotype was fucking withering away before this even came out. And his personality got super annoying the longer he was on screen, to the point where I just wanted him to shut the fuck up. Steve has some decent chemistry with the rest of his squad and a decent goal, but he is so bland in terms of personality, and his comedic scenes are also really goddamn cringy. Deb has great chemistry with her wife and some of her squad, but she feels too much like the token butch lesbian character who's also the mom and or mechanic of the group. Legit, I have seen this archetype as well as the flamboyant stereotype so many fucking times now that it may have coalesced and fused into this deadly new type of mold I see on my TV right now. Really should take care of that. Anyways, Rick was actually really easy for me to write about, because he's just a straight man with little development outside of Steve saying that he seems cool with the team in a later episode, instead of, showing him change his tune over time. Look, I get the show's only 10 episodes, but they also had a lot of fluff that could have been cut to give the viewers development for this annoying, arrogant prick, so it's not like it was impossible for them to do it. As it stands, Rick is a nuisance who did not get better for me as time went on, and frankly, if he died in the season finale, I wouldn't have cared one bit. The only other character that I sort of liked outside of that sacrifice character was Stat, and that was partially because she was just tired of everyone's shit. But she also had good chemistry with Steve and Jacqueline, so what's the issue I have with this one then? Well, she doesn't really do much when compared to the others after the 5th episode. She's basically just vibing, save for the moments where she needs to hack and or help in the finale, and that sucks. V gets an interesting story later down the line, but she's also really bland as a character, so frankly, nothing about her really stood out to me outside of, oh yeah, the storyline with her and Karen was neat. And that's really it for the main group of characters. The rest are just flat or unlikable to me.
Suck my fat cock.
Like I said, there's a lot of sprinkles here that can make the characters fascinating and interesting and great. But the comedy weighs them down so much to the point where it's hard to even see them. And that's probably the biggest crutch against this show, if you couldn't already tell. If this show wasn't either filled with a majority of terrible, cringeworthy, or just shitty reference-based comedy, and/or was just a spy show with an LGBT-focused cast, I think this show easily could have been great. Yes, what I just proposed would have just made this a generic spy series with an LGBT paint job, but it still would have been good. And besides, we eat prepackaged media just alter slightly differently all the goddamn time, with little to no complaints from the general audience. Hell, just look at all the American remakes of international films. But I digress. In the end, this show was a massive letdown to me, because it had so much potential from its premise, but it bungled it so hard from start to finish that there's barely a corpse for me to examine. Oh, speaking of, I'm sure there's gonna be some who's gonna call me a homophobe or some shit for trashing this show, but you know what? Honestly, I just don't care. I just wanted this show to be good, and it let me down time after time. That's also why I didn't make too many jokes about this, because by the time I was done, I was fucking sapped of empathy. I was just feeling apathetic. Like this show? Great. More power to you. Don't like it? That's fine too. Not liking this show doesn't make someone a homophobe, unless they hate it because it has gay people in it, in which case I'll happily join you with the pitchfork and torches, but in any other circumstance, it just means that they don't like the show. And there was clearly a lot that would have worked amazingly here, if it wasn't weighed down by the option to make it a terrible fucking comedy. I don't know, maybe in season 2 they'll drop the comedic element, but then it'll just feel kinda weird. Who fucking knows? It's even implying the show gets a second season at this point. We don't even know what's gonna happen. In the end, we don't live in that timeline. So, instead, I'm just gonna turn off my TV, throw it in the incinerator to deal with that fucking mold, and try to find something LGBT related that's treated with more respect to the community than this show is. Anyways, until we meet again, I'm David Grimm, and thank you for watching.